So we dealt with objects a little bit yesterday. Const obj equal whatever. We can give them properties and values. Things like name, Marshall. Can throw the comma in there. Oh, there he is. I was like, oh, it's not there. Over to the right. Threw me off. Now, how would we get Marshall back out of there? What I type? Obj what? To get the string Marshall out of that object. Now that it's there. Yeah, Pranav. Object. Bracket the string name would do it. What's another thing that's exactly the same as that? Object dot name. Right? So what if I didn't put that in there at the time that I declared originally assigned the object, and I wanted to set name to Marshall? What could I type? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so not only can object.name retrieve the thing, it can also set it. And it's not a problem referring to a property that isn't on there yet. It'll just be undefined, but we can assign it that way. Now, if we hadn't set it and we tried to say object.name dot length or something, then we would have a problem. And it would say that there's no property length on it. So what about this? Do the thing, colon, function. Valid? So the properties in an object can point to any sort of thing. It could be a string, it could be a number, it could be an array, it could be another object, and it could be a function. Totally valid. How would I call this function? I know. Sorry knows. Anybody other than sorry no? I know you do. You basically just did it. Are you nodding, Zoe, or are you just, is your head just vibrating slightly? You agree that you should. Do you? Object dot do the thing would get us this function. If I wanted to call that function then. Yep. Or, she said, brackets, the string, do the thing. Valid? Can we do that? Why the heck not? It's a property of an object. So what if we wanted to call it now? Where do the parentheses go? Basically got a 50-50 chance. But think about it for a moment. Are the parentheses part of the name of the property? No. So where do they go? Tell us, Andrew. Yeah, outside of the square brackets. Totally works. So we have a special name for functions like this. Functions that are part of an object. Anybody know that word? It's a word that we borrow from the world of classical object-oriented programming. This is prototypal object-oriented programming, but that's neither here nor there. What do you call functions that are, say, part of a class? Now, these aren't classes, but what do you call functions inside a class? Who knows an object-oriented language like Java? What do you call the functions inside a class? Method, yeah. So when you call a function using the dot syntax, basically, or the bracket syntax, if that function is a property of an object, we call those methods. So I'll use that word whenever I remember to when I'm referring to things like that. But there is some significance to it. Methods are a little different in their behavior under some very specific circumstances that we will discover when stuff breaks. All right? So, knowing that, let's transform this whole thing to be like that. So for the moment, we will accept having one global variable for our entire app. So I'll say const people factory equals this big object. Let's get rid of our invocation down here. To start. Now, of course, I've got errors all over the place because it's not in the right format for an object. So what would we do with person form here? How could we change this line so that person form is a property of people factory? How about we just say person form colon document blah 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 comma? Make sense? See what we're doing? So for render color, we could say render color colon function blah blah blah. Put a comma after it. Does this make sense? Just keep doing that all the way down. Render list item. Just a property name now. And that property points to a function. Don't forget your comma in between properties. Render list, colon, function, blah, blah, blah. Handle submit, colon, function, blah, 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 comma. And then this, what do we do with this? So right now, we're just declaring this object, but we're never actually running any of its methods, right? And this one line, this is the one line that really needs to run at the very beginning. If we just look at the whole kind of event model, we're saying when something happens, do something else, right? So when the page first loads, we're creating a bunch of methods and stuff, but the only action we're actually taking is we're telling it to listen for something, right? And all that is, all add event listener is saying is when something happens, do something else. So when what happens? Some sort of event. Do what? Run some event handler that we're going to assign. In this case, our function handle submit. So this is what that line is really saying. When this submit happens, do handle submit. Handle submit's a function. Why don't I do that? Why don't I put parentheses there? Why don't I do that? Let's look at an example here. Let's say function say yeah. Alert. No. Let's say return the string yeah. My button dot add event listener. Click. Say yeah with parentheses. Now I'm telling it, when click happens, do what? What does this evaluate to? That's not the function say yeah. That's the string yeah, right? With the parentheses there, that actually runs the function and gives us its return value, which is just a string. A string can't handle an event. So when the event occurs, it'll try to dispatch this event object to a string, so nothing's going to happen. It needs the function itself, right? Not its return value. So we need to pass in an actual function, not a string. And when we put the parentheses there, what we have is a string. Make sense? We end up with the return value instead of the function itself. So the event handler needs to be a function. So the point is we need to run this So how about we add a method to our object? I'll add it at the top. And I'll just call it init. And that will add the event listener. Make sense? Then we need to be sure that we run it. So remember, this whole object is called people factory. It's down here after we've created it. We'll say people factory dot init. Make sense? So we'll create this big object, and then we'll call its init method, kind of like a constructor in a class. Init is not a magic word, by the way. It's just what I chose to call it. It's kind of a sensible name, but there's nothing special about that word. So whatever initial setup I need to do as soon as this thing loads, I'm just going to put inside this function, this method. Now, person form we have as a property on the object, but we never actually use it again. It's only used to add the event listener. So we probably don't really need to do that. We could just instead make it a local variable in here. Make sense? Now, we like to make things reusable, don't we? On the scale of awesomeness, we like to go all the way. So we can make this a little easier to reuse if we didn't hard code this selector for the ID of the form. What if instead init accepted an argument that is the selector? So like this. And instead of hard coding the string person form, we just use whatever string was passed in there. So then when we call init, we need to make sure to pass that in. Now, it's all in one file here, so it's kind of silly, right? I'm hard coding it one place instead of the other. But if this people factory object were in its own file, and we're doing this somewhere else, we could use this on more than one form on the same page, even, just by calling init with different arguments. Get why I'm doing that kind of? Just trying to make it a little more flexible. Does it work? And if not, at what point does it break down? Refresh the page. At what point does it break down? Immediately. Uh-oh, it's an error. I cannot proceed. No, by golly, I'm going to read the error message and see if it contains some helpful hints, not just throw up my hands. Handle submit is not defined on line 4 in init. So line 4, handle submit, right here. It says it's not defined. What gives? So the way I'm referring to it here, I would need to just have a function named handle submit, either as just a function within the current scope, declared with the function keyword, or as a variable assignment within the current scope. But that's not the case. It's a method of people factory. Pretend we don't even know what variable name this is assigned to. Maybe it isn't assigned to anything. Maybe it's just an object literal. But we don't know the name of this. We just want to say the handle submit method on the current object. What we need is a way to refer to the current object from inside that object. Does anybody happen to know the keyword for that? It is one of the most unfortunate things in the entire language. Sorry? It is this. The magic word this, which you are going to learn to hate in short order. Because, wow, is it inconsistent. Oh, it consistently does the thing that Brendan Ike programmed it to do in his 10-day coding spree 20 or 21 years ago. 22 years ago now? It's been a while. Anyway, yes, we're still living with the decisions made during those 10 days. So, inside a method on a function, inside a method on an object, this, most of the time, will refer to that object. So we say this dot handle submit. And we hope this particular error message goes away, and we can move on to another error message. Refresh. Okay. So no other error messages from running a init, right? Because init's the only method we've actually called. Everything else starts to happen once the form is submitted, right? So let's see what happens when we do that. I'm not going to bother putting anything in the form. Go. Okay, render color is not defined on line 46. Line 46. Now that's inside handle submit. Line 46, render color. What should I change it to? This dot render color. Okay, so let's see if we get a different error message instead of this one. Render color is not defined on line 46. Yeah, totally different error message. This dot render color is not a function on line 46. What? Wait, what? What gives? We've been betrayed. So how do we even begin troubleshooting this? Just thinking through it in English. So pretend I don't know the answer. How am I going to figure this out? This would appear not to be what I expect it to be at this point. So my investigation should begin at trying to figure out what it actually is. What the heck is this, since this isn't what I expected it to be? Could they have chosen another word other than this? A word that doesn't appear in every other sentence in the English language? All right, so I'm going to put a breakpoint in here. Debugger. That way, as soon as I get into handle submit, it's going to pause execution and I can find out what this is. Refresh. Do it. Let's see. Here's my local scope. Can you guys read that? That's kind of small, but. So this, down here. This is the form, not the object. Why? The form. Yeah. Right. We didn't call handle submit, right? JavaScript called it for us when the event fired. So here's the little secret. It doesn't matter where you wrote the function. What matters is how you call the function. Just because handle submit is a method, because we didn't call it that way, because we didn't say whatever dot handle submit open close parens, had we done that, this would be bound to the object, whatever came before the dot. But when a function is invoked as an event listener, this is always bound to the event on which, to the object on which the event fired. In other words, this will be bound to the target of the event. So, init here, we called it by saying peoplefactory.init, open close parens. So we know that inside init, this will be set to peoplefactory, that object. But we didn't run handle submit ourselves. It was invoked as an event handler automatically. And anytime a function, whether it's a method or not, is invoked as an event handler, this will always be bound to the target of that event. It's just one of those things you have to memorize. Since we have event.target, that isn't terribly useful to us. So and I'll be honest, there's not really a better way to get to it. There's no other way to get to the object on which this method exists. We really need this to be bound to the right thing. Fortunately, we have ways of forcing it. We have a few ways. We're going to talk about one of them right now. It's easy. It's just unintuitive. So if we want to force the value of this for a particular function, we can call a method called bind on that function and pass in whatever we want this to be set to. If we wanted this to be the string pancakes, we could do that. And now, inside handle submit, this will be the string pancakes. Doesn't do us any good, but we can do it. What do we want it to be? Again, pretend we don't even know that this is called People Factory up here. What do we want it to be bound to? This is going to seem ridiculous. This, right? So on line 4, inside init, this is the right thing, right? It's the object. So if at that point we say handle submit dot bind this, then that's what we'll have. We'll have a version of that function with this bound to whatever this is now. Perfect sense? Cool. The point is, whatever we put in there, spaghetti and pancakes, now this will be bound to that string, right? So whatever we pass in there, and the thing that we want happens to already be called this as of this point in the execution. Yeah, Tom?
So will this kind of bind method kind of like redirect the way the function returns? Like, so if a function has a return value, does it redirect it?
No, it doesn't do that. It doesn't affect the return value. The only thing it affects is the way that we've used it, is what this will be bound to inside of it. So if that function never explicitly calls this, then it won't have any effect at all. But here's a point I want to make. Could I do this? I probably wouldn't ask if the answer were yes, right? So there's something wrong with this, but what's wrong with it? Think back to the example with add event listener. Which example? What's wrong with this? What am I calling bind on? What's to the left of this dot? A function? The result of calling a function. The return value of that function. I'm not calling bind on init. I'm calling bind on whatever init returns, because the parentheses are there, right? So let's use our lame example again. Function, say yeah. Return the string, aw yeah. Say yeah. Dot bind, whatever. What am I calling bind on? A function? A string, right? Because these parens are there, that isn't the function, say yeah. It's the string, aw yeah. It's whatever it returned. So if I wanted to bind this inside People Factory to something, I would have to say People Factory dot bind whatever. And then I suppose I could call it, right? So bind is going to return a function, the same function with the rules changed. So back up here, The second argument to add event listener must be a function, not the return value of a function. So just like that. Or if we call bind on that, now we're getting the return value of bind, but that is a function. Bind will return the same function with the value of this forced to be what we chose. So now it'll be what we expect. So what is it we were actually trying to troubleshoot? Put a debugger in there. Render color is not a function on, now it's line 48 because I have a breakpoint in there. Get rid of that. So now because of that bind, we think line 46 should be okay. So we're hoping for a different error message this time. I mean, we're hoping for no error message, but let's not kid ourselves. All right. Submit again. Different error. Render list is not defined on line 50. Render list right here. We just haven't added this yet, right? Good, an easy one. What's next? Render list item is not defined on line 32. Line 32, I think we're out of handle submit finally. Line 32, render list item. 32, render list item. Just change it to this. Dot, render list item. Okay, render list item, line 32. Refresh, try again. Now this dot render list item is not a function on line 32. We've been betrayed again. Just when we thought JavaScript was our friend. So line 32, this dot render list item is not a function. So once again, this isn't what we expected it to be. Why not? What function are we in here on line 32? And yes, this is a trick question. What function are we in? Look at it for a minute. Line 32 is inside which function? So render list is the obvious answer, right? Andrew? This function right here, the anonymous function inside map. It counts. Every time there's a new function, this gets bound again. And this function isn't a method, is it? It's just a function. So what is this going to be inside here, do you think? I mean, unless you happen to know, you would never guess this in a million years. So I'll just show you. Debugger. Debugger, debugger. Okay. This is window. What the heck is window? Did we talk about window at all? I don't think so. Window is the global object when you're running JavaScript inside the browser. You can get to it any time with window. So your global variables are actually created as properties of window. Interesting little bit of trivia. We'll go old school. Var, my var equals 4. Refresh. So we could say my var, get 4. We can also say window dot my var, also 4. Document that we've been using, window dot document, same thing. So window is the global object. What earthly good does it do us for this to be bound to window? It doesn't do us any good at all. all functions declared with regular old function declarations, bind this to window, making it completely useless to us. So inside methods, as long as we call them with the dot or the brackets, it sets this to the current object. Inside event handlers, it sets it to the event target. Also potentially useful. Of course, we could also just say event.target, but still, at least it makes some sense. But inside every other function, it just gets set to the global object. Maybe the single, well, I don't know. There's some competition. Definitely one of the single weirdest decisions made in JavaScript's design. Because it can't be used for anything. So we have to force it to be something else. So it's calling window.renderListItem, which isn't a thing. How could we do it? How can we force it to be what we want? We could use bind again. Where would we put it? Think about this for just a second. Where would I put bind if I wanted to force this to be what I want this way? Remember, we'll call bind on the function itself. Don't get me out there. Think about it for just a minute. I won't make you suffer for long. I mean, I'm going to make you suffer for another hour and a half, but not over this particular thing. Actually, I'm going to make you suffer for another 2.5 weeks. No, this is a joy, right? Most of it. Where would we put bind? A little louder? Like down here? That is a very good guess. That paren matches up with map here. So we'd be calling it on the return value of map, which happens to be an array. So it's not quite right, but you're super, super close. Yeah, Pranav?
Would you put it after item?
Item here? Or item which? Over here?
Yeah.
Also very, very close. What's right between here and here? The curly brace. Right, so that's actually the end of this function declaration, right? That ends right here, the closing curly brace. So we could put bind this in here and it would do what we want. Is that easy to read? No. You have to really look to find that. So I don't like that. But that's how we would do it if we wanted to use bind. But we have another trick up our sleeves. It's tough to say what I was most excited about in ES6, but this is a strong contender. I was pretty excited about the backticks, the templates. But this was really exciting. Arrow functions. We looked at them very briefly yesterday, right? So we can write a function like this, or we could write a function like this, argument list, arrow, curly braces. So that would be anonymous. If we wanted to assign it to something, we would say const, say shucks, equals this function. So we could write an anonymous function that way. Arguments first, then an arrow, then curly braces. It's shorter, which maybe that holds some appeal in and of itself. It happens to be similar to Lambda syntax in some other languages, and it happens to be ripped directly from CoffeeScript. But it doesn't behave exactly the same as doing it this way. If you had to guess, based on the context of the class right now, what would you guess is the difference between doing it these two ways? The binding of this. When you use an arrow function, let's go up to our map here. If we changed function, label, curly brace to argument list, arrow, curly brace, guess what? It binds this the way we want it to. So arrow functions always bind this to whatever this was at that point. Whatever this is on the line above that arrow function is what this will be inside that arrow function. So basically, arrow functions just do what functions should have done all along. So we have to live with the decisions that Brendan Eich made that 1 week a million years ago, because there's too much existing JavaScript code for us to change the rules now, right? But we can invent whole new syntax. We have to remain backwards compatible, but we can add new stuff. So we have a new syntax, arrow functions, that behave the way functions probably should have just behaved all along, and bind this to whatever this was at that point. So we're going to be using arrow functions a lot, as you might guess. Does it get this past this one error? Refresh. Go. There we go. I didn't actually type anything in there. So let's do that. Skylar, whose favorite color is that color, whose age is 423. Yay, we fixed it. Go us. So what did we accomplish? All told, we wrapped everything inside a function. Now all our old functions are now methods. Good for us. Well, it's a little better organized now, and if this weren't the entire JavaScript for the whole project, it would be neatly isolated from everything else. As it is, it's still an okay way to organize things. But it was harder than necessary for this project. But now we've done it once, so when we do it the second time, it won't be quite as excruciating. Maybe. Wrap everything in an object with methods. Ah, this, our favorite. Questions? We'll be seeing this a lot more times, so hopefully it'll become slightly more familiar.